So my name is Theresa. I facilitate the YFN 101. It's a course at the university. I am a Kwanlin First Nation member, and I'm from the Wolf Clan.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah, so my first initial question, in your opinion as a First Nation, what is the importance of land acknowledgements to you?
For me, it's important because it gives people the opportunity to research the land and the First Nations who reside there, and gives them that opportunity to understand their history and the relationship that they have with the land. And I think that we haven't had, the land acknowledgements have become pretty common in the last number of years. I'd say like the last 10 or 15 years, we see people using land acknowledgements more often. And I think that that's important because I think that it also builds relationship with people, and it gives people the opportunity to further that relationship just in their understanding.
So to basically like tell their story.
Yeah, for our next question, so we've done some research on like land acknowledgements like in the past, and before even the European settlers, we understand like the land acknowledgements were performed long ago. How is it different now from how it was before?
Okay, so from what I understand is that when people were traveling into territories that they knew were where people would have their traditional hunting grounds, or if they knew that they were residing there for gathering or anything like that, they would wait outside, and it was a respectful way of approaching our traditional territory, just waiting outside until it's been acknowledged that they're there, and it's a form of respect. And so it definitely has changed from then to now. Just we don't do that anymore, but now we're starting to see the land acknowledgements that you see quite often in conferences or in different forms of gathering, and it's just acknowledging the people and the land. And so it is a big contrast, but it's also similar in a way of showing respect.
Yeah, you were talking about how land acknowledgements have changed, and we were wondering, do you think they're now more focused on, a sense of, apology? And do you think that will, continue to be the case as we move into the future?
I think, there are many different forms. I've seen land acknowledgements in many different forms. People necessarily need to apologize for the past. I think it's more just recognizing it. I think that is something that is quite often happening. I think that land acknowledgements will continue to evolve, and through encouragement, I always encourage people to do their research when they're going, because for in the Yukon, because that's where I'm from, there's 14 different First Nations, and so when you're going into, say, Selkirk First Nation, you'd want to know the area and know a little bit about the history and the relationship that the First Nation has with the community. Or for myself, because I work with Yukon University, I'd want to have a better understanding of the relationship that they have with the university. And so I think that I see that land acknowledgements have started to evolve into more of that, just recognizing the relationship that you have for whatever reason that you're there, whether it's for school, whether it's for work, and what you're representing. I keep on saying I work at the university, so that would be me representing the university. So I'd do a little bit of research on Yukon University and the relationship that Selkirk First Nation would have with them, and also understanding more about their history.
Yeah, so this brings us into our next point. What do you think are some issues we currently face and concerns with land acknowledgements? What do you think can be improved in general?
I've often find that land acknowledgements are scripted. Say similar things. For example, you see a land acknowledgement in people's email. At the bottom of their email, underneath their signature, you'll see a written land acknowledgement, and often it's the same for the whole organization. I feel like that just doesn't, like, if it's something that's provided to somebody rather than them doing their own land acknowledgement, then I don't feel that it's genuine. I think it's just something that's copied and pasted in.
Yeah.
And so I really encourage people to do research and just look into traditional territory and understanding it more. And that's something that when land acknowledgements are scripted, or if people are having somebody write out the land acknowledgement for their speeches, then it's not coming from the heart. And people will know it. They'll be able to see it right away. And so I think that that's one of the issues that a lot of First Nations are seeing, is that, you know, especially like if you're at a conference or something where there's lots of people getting up and speaking, and everybody stands up and then they all say the exact same thing, like, I acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territories of It's not genuine. Then I'm going back to the emails. Whenever I see a personalized acknowledgement, I always take the time to read it, because it actually warms my heart to know that a person has put the time into to reflect and to spend the time to write it out. And I think that that's really important.
When people just copy and paste them, they're not actually taking the time to like think about what they're saying, and so it just, like you're saying, it doesn't come from the heart. And that's something we were looking at a lot, like in our project, and we're thinking about how like we can best write like personal connections and make them meaningful, like by making them personalized, and even like getting rid of a script all like entirely.
And just focusing more or less on the, you know, what you're grateful for.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt to always like do research and see how other people are doing it as well. Like I wouldn't shy away from that. Just use your own words when you're writing it out. It's good to get guidance in different ways, but also to do the looking in and the reflecting and having it come from the heart is the most important thing, I think.
Well, I am an elder now. I was born and raised in Whitehorse. I didn't grow up in my First Nation because back in the 50s, maybe even before that, we were a Bill C-31, which meant that we weren't First Nations and weren't Native. We were, well, some other people used to refer us as nobodies because we didn't belong to a First Nation and we didn't belong to a non-First Nation either. But the reason it happened was back in the 50s when the residential school was still up and running. There was two here in the Yukon, two in the Whitehorse area. And, one was in Carcross, but here in Whitehorse there was two, Yukon Hall and Couder. I am a residential school survivor. I went to the ones here in Whitehorse, the Yukon Hall and Couder residents. And I've also gone to group homes. I'm a cancer survivor, 2-time cancer survivor. And also I'm a former leader of the Kwanlundun First Nation, the longest running leader, served 21 years straight, no breaks. I'm really honored to have been guide my First Nation because I've learned so much about how governments work. I've learned about policies and why it's important to have these policies. And they have policies and how they protect you. But in my role as a leader, I was also ambassador. Like, you know, I went out to the different events around Whitehorse, and I just greeted the visitors and welcomed them to the First Nation. And just said that we want to work together, but while we're doing that, it's important for you to respect our policies of looking after the land and being respectful, you know. To me, it's a value. I come from the Wolf clan. The reason that happened was my grandmother, I had an aunt and an uncle in residential school, and my grandparents did not want them there, especially my grandmother, because it was not a very nice place. And so my grandfather, back then, you were a First Nation. You weren't allowed to go into town. You weren't allowed to shop. You weren't even allowed to work or even vote or anything. And my grandmother told my grandfather, you do what you have to do. I want my kids out of where they're at, the residential school. So he enfranchised. He gave up his rights, and out of that, he was allowed to vote. He was allowed to come into town. He was allowed to shop, and he was allowed to work. 1986, that's when the First Nations that enfranchised gave up their rights. That's when they were given their rights back. And that's when we were recognized as First Nations people. Not being non-First Nations, like I couldn't live in the reserves in the community because we're non-First Nations. I do live in my own community now. I got back my status in 1986. I went back to school as an adult and I graduated because I'm a strong advocate for education. With education, you can do things. You can go further in life. Well, do whatever your little heart desires. If you want to be an astronaut, a doctor, you can do it. Nothing's impossible. But you need an education to do that.
Yeah, and what's your opinion on like us calling you from the BC First Peoples class? Does it excite you that we're learning about your cultures and practices, and we're really striving to reconciliate?
Yeah, I am. When I first got the call, I thought, "Whoa, holy smokes, my name out there," but I am, being a former residential school survivor, I look at this whole era of residential school now as I dealt with the anger and the bitterness of being a survivor, but now I think it's important for the rest of Canada to know who we are as First People, as Indigenous people. Because you look where we are, we're labeled as being uneducated people, street people, but we are getting back on our feet. We've got doctors out there, lawyers. And why I say these things is because this day and age, I think to get over the racism and the discrimination, the non-Native people need to understand who we are and where we came from, why we're the way we are, I guess, because our lives were hard. We were governed by a government that thought they knew what was good for us, but we're no different than anybody else. We have our own culture. We have our own religion. We have our own medicines. We have our own art. We're people. And I think it's time that other people, the non-Native population, understand who we are as First Nations people, and that we don't want to be labeled, want to be looked at as First Peoples, because we have a lot to offer. And with the stories of residential school, I hope that really helps them understand why we're the way some of us are. Like I said, we're all alike. We have our own beliefs, we have our own culture, and even when it comes to preparing foods, because we eat the same foods, but what makes it different is how it's prepared.
In your opinion, as a respected elder, what is the importance of land acknowledgements?
The importance of land acknowledgements. Each First Nation has their own territory, but it's also very important for not only the First Nation, for others to know what territory you're in. And then also it's important to know the policies or the rules, like, what you should do when you're on somebody else's territory.
Yeah, no, for sure. That makes sense. In the past, and understand that land acknowledgements were performed long ago, and I just want to get your opinion on how you think they've changed, from the past till now.
On land acknowledgement, to me, growing up here in the Yukon, traditional territories and that, they've always been there. Like, each First Nation had their own traditional territory, but now it's recorded and mapped out. But before, it was just where they lived, their hunting areas, where they harvested their foods, and there was no boundaries. Land claims has come into the picture. There are now boundaries in each traditional territory. So if you're traveling around and you're going to, one nation to another, it's good to know what those policies and what they are, because it's out of respect and for the First people there in the area.
Do you think land acknowledgements will continue to be done in the future? I mean, obviously, your role as an elder is to teach your cultural practices to, the young and stuff like that. So, I mean, I kind of just want to tie this back and end it off with kind of how we're going to look into the future.
Well, I really hope the land acknowledgements are something that we do look at in the future.
What type of differences will land acknowledgements will be like in the future? Like, what do you think needs to be improved for land acknowledgements?
We need to know more of each other. Like, even for me, I still need to learn about traditional territories. What I do is, if I'm going into somebody else's territory, I check out their culture. When I go there, I say thank you for allowing me to come into your territory, and wish them well and state to them what your intentions are.